Welcome to another episode of Consult Therapy, where we reload your mind and revitalize your life. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Consult Therapy, where we are discussing cognitive distortions and how that impacts our lives. So, what is a cognitive distortion? The definition is an internal mental filter or bias that increases our misery, fuels our anxiety, and even enlarges the habit of putting ourselves down. So, we'll talk about the first three cognitive distortions that you might be going through. So, cognitive distortion number one is polarized thinking. People with polarized thinking, it's pretty common. All these cognitive distortions are very common. People with this particular cognitive distortion have the mentality if you don't get a perfect score or result from something, then you're a complete failure. So you can imagine a student who might have gotten an A- on a test. They will think that they're a complete failure because they didn't get an A+, which is what they usually get. Now we can apply this to our own life. So how do you define success? How do you define failure? It is my own personal belief that by suscepting ourselves or putting ourselves in a position where failure is likely but not disastrous, then we can truly grow or fail forward. Just ask anyone who played high school sports or even college sports and they are not a professional league, what they feel and what they've learned by participating in those sports for all those years. I guarantee that if they played sports for more than 1 to 2 years, that they had many things that they learned. They were able to learn grit and learn that by messing up and by practicing that they were able to become better. If you believe that your successes and your failures are solely based on the outcome, you might need to rethink how you think. You might need to look at your life through a different lens and a different perspective. So, cognitive distortion number 2, mental filtering. So, there's 2 parts to mental filtering. Part number 1 is negative mental filtering. For example, an employee receives a great performance review, but because of one negative comment that was made by the manager, it's basically all that was focused on. So part 2 of this cognitive distortion is disqualifying the positive. Let's say a student gets a good grade. Let's say they get an A+ on a test they weren't expecting to. Or maybe they were expecting to, and they discredit themselves by saying it was luck or a fluke. The thing is I think learning how to accept compliments might help us overcome this one. So when someone gives you a compliment that is outcome-based, such as, wow, you're super smart, or dang, you're really good at X, Y, and Z, you can respond by saying, thank you for noticing. I work really hard and take a lot of time practicing, so I appreciate you noticing. Cognitive distortion number 3, overgeneralization. So another example, let's say a student receives one bad grade when they're normally a straight A student, and they think they're stupid or they think they're a failure and believe they will always do bad from that moment forward. You can recognize overgeneralization when you think, say, or hear others say things such as always, never, everyone, everything, or every time. As you pay attention to those words that come into your mind and the words that you might say, you can realize that you might be overgeneralizing something when typically you're really good at it. So I would be very careful on using those words. But most importantly, I think we need to be very careful with the way we use the words I can't. This is all too common of a phrase that I hear myself and everyone around me saying. And I think most of us know the quote by Confucius that says, "He who thinks he can and he who thinks he can't are both usually right." So be very careful how you talk about yourself and how you think about yourself. Because the reality is, as you break through the emotional chains that might be binding you down, you're really freeing yourself. Just like we talked about in the last episode, as you liberate yourself from your own fears, you will unconsciously liberate others. To recap, we went over 3 cognitive distortions today. Cognitive distortion number 1, polarized thinking. It's black or white. There's nothing in between. You either succeed or you fail. So take time to recognize these things in your life. When are times that you might be going through that polarized thinking in your life? Cognitive distortion number 2, mental filtering. Basically taking one negative thing out of a great experience and making that all that is focused on. Or doing something really great and considering it as a fluke or just pure stroke of luck. Be willing to accept the great things about yourself. Be willing to accept that you do great things and that greatness is inside of you. Cognitive distortion number 3, overgeneralization. Be careful for the words of always, never, everyone, everything, and every time, and especially the phrase, I can't. We want to be empowering, not powerless. I challenge you this week to watch your words and watch your thoughts, and I'll be doing the same thing along with you. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Console Therapy, where we reload minds and revitalize lives.